So I'm Jennifer Leaning, again here for a cameo appearance, and I am so proud of Jacqueline Baba and Magda Matashi and Andrea Mirzak, who I'm going to meet soon, for having done this extraordinary book. There have been a number of books that Jackie has been very responsible for organizing and editing or authoring that have arisen out of her relatively short tenure at the FXB Center. And this one, I know the origins of this. There was a sense that she wanted to capture the big intellectual arguments and the very, very powerful and conflicting political and policy arguments that are going on now in Europe and that are actually starting to be launched in the United States around this title, Realizing Roma Rights. This is a really erudite book. I mean, you will learn a great deal about Roma history, the politics and the schisms in the Roma community in Europe, the starts of activism in the United States, the historical ways in which one can think about the Roma in relation to other minority rights struggles. There's particularly good analysis of the overlap and interaction with the African American community here in the United States, and a very distinctive and different history, which is important to note, but it's very clearly articulated in this book. It has a number of great authors from around the world, many, many Roma authors, an interesting essay that is from people in the Department of State of the United States, where it's necessary for them to be taking a position and to support this work. And the introduction in itself is a marvelous encapsulation of the arguments within the book, but also it gives you a sense of Jackie's vision for the future on this really important topic. So I am absolutely delighted to be able to turn the microphone over to the lead editor, Professor Jacqueline Baba, and I encourage you all to buy this book.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's such a privilege to have colleagues who are so unfailingly supportive and really encouraging in what we do. So, as Jennifer rightly said, the vision for this book was to concretize the work that went into one of this conference's predecessors. I think it was 2 years ago, where we talked about many of these issues. We have invited and commissioned some new chapters. But the basic point was to really, we started off with one insight, which Jennifer's already alluded to, which was this: a leading question for many of us as human rights activists is how come some struggles have really managed to leverage the power of the courts to change the ground rules for treatment of their communities, while other communities have not? And in particular, how come that the civil rights movement in the US, the African American movement, really managed, in some ways, a long way left to go, but has managed to use the courts and Brown versus Board of Education to change the playing field in a way in which the Roma community and its allies have not managed to change the playing field by using the European Court of Human Rights? That was one of our big questions. And it's a question that the Roma leadership themselves had. And so when we organized our conference a couple of years ago, we actually had colleagues who had both participated in Brown versus Board of Education as advocates for the NAACP, and we had Roma colleagues who had asked those colleagues, to advise them what was different and what was similar. And some of those debates, as Jennifer said, are captured in this book, and they are really interesting and thought-provoking. So that's one point which I think animated this work. The second idea, and it's something that Magda, I think, mentioned at the beginning, was that we wanted, in our small way, here at Harvard, at a visible, privileged American university, we wanted to contribute to the movement that was going to mainstream within discussions about racism and stigma and discrimination, the racism and stigma and discrimination that's targeting the Roma community. Actually, it was initially Jennifer's vision as director of the FXB Center that we should not only work on the kind of poor developing countries, which is where most of our work is, Africa, Asia, Latin America, we should also work on human rights issues at the heart of privilege. And there's no issue at the heart of privilege more egregious than the treatment of the Roma. And I think as Aidan's book says, or one of your slides showed, it's somehow legitimate to be racist, explicitly and unashamedly racist about the Roma, in a way in which it is not legitimate to be explicitly racist about any other community, whatever you may feel deep down in your heart. So the second notion behind our book, our conference and then this book, was to bring into discussion of discrimination and stigma amongst people who don't work on Roma, like myself. I mean, I now do, but it was not one of my main competences. That thinking, to bring this out of the kind of ghetto of sort of specialist studies into the mainstream, saying this is one of the egregious human rights issues in Europe. So that was the second idea. And then the third idea was simply to bridge the Atlantic and to say, here in America, to our amazement, our continuing amazement, most of our colleagues, including our very educated colleagues in this university, many of them have no idea who the Roma are. You know, they do know when you use gypsy, they think of, you know, gypsy music, they think of the cultural aspects. They will have some sense, of course, of the destitution and hatred towards Roma begging in the streets when they go on holiday to Paris or Rome. But they have very little, if any, sense, and frankly, very little, if any, interest in Roma-related issues. So our third agenda was to link the American Academy to Europeans and to try to bridge that gap. And I think, and I would really give enormous credit to Magda here, that we have actually begun to do that, and we're very proud. And I think without being immodest, and of course our university unfortunately does specialize in being immodest, but I think without being immodest, it is fair to say that we have become, if not certainly one of the leading places now in the States for addressing Roma issues. And it's because really of Magda's leadership and our ability to support us. So we're really proud of that. So with those few comments, I'm just going to hand over to my colleagues, both of whom are, well, Andre is a co-editor with Magda and me, and Erica is a contributor. And I'm going to hand the mic to Erica. Thank you very much. And Erica is actually an American policy expert who works within government, and it's been our privilege actually to have colleagues who've dealt with Roma issues for decades on this side of the Atlantic as part of this project. So Erica, over to you.
Thank you. I think this one will work, so I'll be okay. If I could just start, I'd like to say a couple words about the colleagues that I worked with on this project. So when I got in the mail my copy of the book recently, I took it out and I immediately gave a copy to my 23-year-old son. And I waited for him to look at the cover, and then I waited for him to open to the table of contents and cast his eyes down the list of contributors, waiting for him to find my name. And so what does he say? He looks at the book and says, "Wow, Anjay Mirga." My son had met Anjay a few years ago, and obviously you make a bigger impression on him than I do, which is only fair, because the folks that have worked on this book, I am so privileged to have worked with. Magda, I don't know if you're the Esmeralda of our day, but I do think that future generations, when they want to elevate their peers, will say, you are the Magda Mataki of our efforts. So again, thank you. So I don't want to say how honored or privileged I am to be here, because I think that's a little bit cliche, and I was trying to think how to encapsulate how excited I am about this. I love this. I enjoy being here. I am incredibly excited about what I learned from all the other people who are part of this endeavor. And so that is, if I can convey an emotion, that's what I would convey. Now, as someone that started out in the interdisciplinary Soviet studies program here at Harvard many, many years ago, I see how enriched we are when we take an interdisciplinary approach. And I think that's one of the strengths of a book like this, is that it brings together an examination of a subject through many different prisms. be not afraid. I am not going to be starting any one-woman shows of my own. I don't think we can top what we saw last night, which was incredible. So I will stay in my lane, which is human rights advocacy and human rights law. Now, some of you may have heard of the book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, for me, I've been working on human rights issues for, somewhere around 30 years now. And when I worked on the denial of citizenship to Roma in the Czech Republic, which is what I wrote about for this book, I feel like everything I need to learn about human rights advocacy, that's where I learned it. It is not just a question of the denial of citizenship for Roma, but it is really about so much larger questions. And at that moment, it was about the denial of citizenship to people in the Balkans, where there was a genocidal war going on, or 30 million Russians outside the borders of Russia once the Soviet Union broke apart. So that was extremely important, and I think when you look at many of these chapters, you take away something that you can see, aha, there is this applicability. Yes, it is important for looking at the situation of Roma, but it's important for looking at the situation of all kinds of people all over the world. For me personally, one of the things that was striking was coming to understand the inverse relationship that can sometimes exist between how imminently fixable a problem is, how easily fixable, and the magnitude of resistance to fixing it. And that was, I guess I was very naive. It was shocking to me in a sense, but it really taught me a great deal about the challenges that I was working on. The importance, and this is the US policy perspective, but the necessity, the absolute critical necessity for first building a consensus within the US government in order to take that out internationally, and then secondly, building that international consensus so that all the various stakeholders at the international organization level are speaking from one page. And then what I learned about anticipating and countering the resistance from a government is a skill set that I have taken with me as I've worked on political prisoners in Azerbaijan or Russia, or looking at the status and treatment of detainees held by the United States in counterterrorism theaters like Guantanamo. So all of that has been incredibly important. And then I just wanted to refer back to what Jennifer Lerner said this morning. Thank you for your comments about the relationship between the work that was done on the 2014 report on the situation of Roma and where we are with respect to Hungary today and the threats to democracy that I think exist. I think there are any number of areas where you can say, gee, if we go back and look at, say, the fingerprinting of Roma in Italy in 2008 and 2009, the expulsions of Roma from France in 2010, you can take all that skill set and know everything you need to know about the reaction to immigrants and migrants and refugees today. So I hope you will embrace this book for those kinds of broader lessons as well as for the specificities about the situation of Roma. Thank you.
Okay. While celebrating 8th of April, International Roma Day, and that was a rationale for launching Realizing Roma Rights close to this date, our attention is taken over by immediate concerns of the day. The prospect of closure of the Central European University in Budapest. Adopted amendments to the Hungarian national law on higher education by Hungarian parliament on 4th of April makes it possible. It fulfills Orban's regime policy to get rid of independent higher education facilities supported by George Soros. No doubt, CEU in its 25 years of functioning have become a key place for raising up well-educated and skilled Roma professionals, who became the resource for Roma community, Roma movement, and majority society. Similarly, Budapest emerged as a key hub for Roma professionals, activists and advocates of Roma rights, as many Roma-centered organizations have been harbored there. So we Roma have much in stake in the CU. Addressing, therefore, as we do in this book, the question of persisting anti-Roma discrimination and social stigma in contemporary society, find it additional and indeed very much disturbing further realization. It was, I think, not our intention to see such developments ongoing. Rather opposite, we were highlighting them in order to push policymakers to get rid of them. In the midst of bad news that we are all facing right now in Europe and elsewhere, I think the book we are launching today opens also some more positive paths for developments. Following on Duncan Green's recent book, How Change Happens, we need to grasp with critical junctions, moments as opportunities for change in Europe and especially in the EU in such a historical moment. In this book article, I have concluded that the EU Roma policy remains to date the only framework that is strong and available for Roma in Europe. There is more to be said how it is evolving since I have wrote these words. First, the concept of anti-gypsies as defined in the General Recommendation number 13 of ECRI from 2011 enters also in the lexicon of the EU, both of the Commission and that of the European Parliament. Second, a discussion started on the post-2020 EU Roma framework in Brussels, and that's a positive move. In whatever solution to be found for the future of the EU, there are ongoing debates among member states on this. Its EU Roma framework needs to be kept and developed as the only significant and institutionalized policy able to impact the situation on many Roma communities and individuals in the EU member countries, accessing countries, but also beyond. And I believe our book provides an important input to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. So we are just going to symbolically pop the cork in here and then invite all of you to join us. But let me just... want me to pop the cork? Okay. Yes, this is the photo op. Where do I play with? Thank you all. And may we really realize Roma rights. That's the hope. Thank you.